Mm. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Venice Biennale episode of Sheltering Places. Sheltering Places is a public program organized by students and researchers at the New Center for Research and Practice. This session will be followed by the second edition of Hyper Annotation series during the preview days of La Biennale in Venice, focusing on conversation with artists, curators, and art professionals in town for the event. My name is Atefeh, and today me and Agata are joined by this amazing group of people. Neringa Bumbliene, curator of Lithuanian Pavilion, Lizaveta German, curator of Ukrainian Pavilion, and Joanna Warsza, curator of Polish Pavilion. And we may be joined by Julieta Aranda from e-flux. She's not still here, but we're waiting for her.
So thank you, Atef, for the introduction. I would like to start conversation with a more open question. It's not directed to a particular person, so just feel free to respond in your own piece. We have noticed that generally in the art world, and particularly in artworks presented in Venice, there is a future-oriented approach to addressing geopolitical or environmental questions, motivated by the belief in positive change. But it seems that future is already here, and the recent events and radicalization of politics on its conservative edges don't show that positive changes are soon or even possible. And especially this year with the military aggression of Russia on the territory of Ukraine, the immediacy of the real world is finding its way more than ever into the Biennale. So maybe general pessimism would help us better respond towards events. And we have these two powerful ideas of reenchantment and exhaustion as borrowed metaphors from the works of Małgorzata Amirgatas presented by the Polish Pavilion and Pablo Makov presented by Ukrainian Pavilion. So we would like to know how could you relate to those two confronting perspectives?
I'm happy to start. Yeah, as you mentioned, this idea of exhaustion is the central to Pablo Makov's piece we're presenting in the Ukrainian Pavilion. And I can say that, just responded to what you just mentioned, I can say that the piece of Pablo Makov is about future that is not now, but the future which has been here for a while. We just haven't been able to notice it. We just haven't been able to recognize it. The actual piece, this Fountain of Exhaustion, the idea came to Makov in the early 90s, and it was about the post-Soviet city of Kharkiv when he was resided. You know, it's like a large city in the east of Ukraine, and industrial one, but also the city of universities, the city of constructivism. And it was about exhaustion of social life, of some social relations which were changing, which were in the transition after the Soviet Union collapse. And but then 27 years ago, Pablo decided, it's not like this, he decided, he was always willing to do it, to complete it, to realize this idea as a working kinetic sculpture with water inside, because he wasn't able to do so before. And upon our invitation to present it in Venice, he realized that this project became even more relevant than it used to be. But now this idea, the symbol of exhaustion, doesn't only relate to a local context of Ukraine, of the post-Soviet country, which is not post-Soviet anymore, which has its own 30 years of independence history, but that it refers to a global context, and it becomes the symbol of exhaustion of on ecological level, of course, as you just mentioned, also exhaustion of political relationship, is all these political manipulations we've been experiencing both eastwards and westwards, and just global south, global nurse, if you can say, it does relate to everyone, no matter what kind of political regime we're living in. Of course, it's about exhaustion of economical relations, economical models, and that this project became, well, of course, needless to say that the pandemic was also about exhaustion of just human resources and about our inability to sometimes adapt ourselves to new social reality. But of course, after the war started, it has become the symbol of exhaustion of humanity, which of course also relates to everyone, not just to Ukraine, which has this direct impact, direct suffering, but it does relate to much more global context. But also, when I was answering your questions about the future, I think it is the future which we could have recognized 5 years ago, 10 years ago. And by saying we, I don't mean Ukrainians, I mean global community. This is the aggression which is now we're experiencing was quite clear and quite obvious years ago. No one just recognized it. So I think, when you're looking at the project of Pavel Markov, and in more general to all of his practice, because his practice is very rich and very diverse. And now I'm looking at many of his pieces, his graphics, his drawings, his just some sculptural, more conceptual works, which he created 10 years ago. And I'm sometimes just shocked that it is so obvious how he envisioned many things. And I don't want to, to have this conversation about the artist as a prophet, an artist as a kind of, someone who sees the future. No, it's just about the sensibility, which is so obvious and which is so, so kind of clear that, it just kind of takes my breath away, how sensible he was and how many things were clear in his art. So I think, unfortunately, it's not about, our project is not about the bright future, which will be, soon to come, but the kind of gloomy future, which has already arrived, years ago, that we've been living in this gloomy future for a while. But I don't want to kind of end up on a pessimistic note, because in the end, there is a lot of poetry and a lot of beauty in Markov's object. It's not just a dark social statement. It's about, well, it's a symbol which can be, read and which can be explained on many levels. And we would be happy if people will be just contemplated on, water drops of this fountain, because the fountain of exhaustion is the fountain which is not kind of jumping up, but kind of goes down until the water is not there anymore. So the fountain exhausts itself. So we would be happy, if just people will contemplate on the water and find some beauty in it, and then just, find some peace there, find some tranquility there. So yeah, that's how I would interpret your statement about the future. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I feel it's kind of relevant that Pavel Markov had this intuition to the maybe work presented in the Lithuanian Pavilion. So maybe, Neringa, you could tell something more about that.
Yes, so I was thinking Lizaveta explaining us the stories behind their pavilion, and I was kind of wondering that for us is somehow different, I guess. Of course, the artist is much younger, so he was a child when the Soviet Union collapsed, and we went through different phases of our independence, but the project is more kind of focused of what do we have now today, including all the kind of promises and beliefs and ambitions, and it's more like just kind of seeing what we have here around us and what we can do with that to kind of to build some, I don't know, better structures that would fit us personally better, where we can kind of, create new ways of how we collaborate, how we work together, how we live together, how we build or kind of fix our environment together, and not speaking together not only about the human to human, but the human to other species as well, because there is also this kind of narrative of bacteria, like fermentation bacteria, which kind of changes products into some kind of something better that helps us maybe to find our intuition and our kind of way through different obstacles and challenges in this world. So kind of course, there is this kind of backside, and the project is kind of rather sarcastic, and kind of uses tools of capitalist production, like we are referring to cooperative and fabric and and so on. But still somehow like also working on it and speaking to the artists and being in a pavilion and presenting it to other people, I kind of feel somehow empowered by what we have. And also, as all of us, we started working on the project in 2020, so it was the middle of COVID crisis, and now we are facing this brutal and completely unbearable Russian invasion in Ukraine. And of course, we kind of discussed a lot what can art do, what we should do in the pavilion, and maybe what we can do outside of a pavilion. And these are somehow of course, very important questions, but I also somehow feel that, we have certain power in our hands. Each of us have our voice, have our abilities, and we can try and come together and do something to change this world. So it's kind of in the Lithuanian Pavilion is more about, performative action and, of course, many complexities involved and, all the contradictions of the world, but yeah.
This could actually bring us more close to the idea of re-enchantment. So maybe, Joanna, you would like to speak about it.
Yes, sure. Well, just drawing a little bit on what has been said by my colleagues before, that of course on the night of 24th of February, somehow it's like a reality check. You ask yourself, how do you continue also as a curator? What does it mean now to just do the business as usual, and where do we stand? So do we stand on this more like, or have to in a way pessimist side, or what, where do we go from there? And obviously, one feeling that comes to mind, like obvious terrifying feeling, is that this is like a war from, we were talking about it with Lisa earlier, that this is like a war from 20th century now in the 21st century. And this means it's also a war that kind of cancels the discourses and art and ideas with whom many of us cultural workers have been working or trying to work, such as the colonial discourses, feminist discourses, the discourses of interdependence. All this, obviously, out of the sudden is completely out of the picture in the reality of the aggression of Russia in Ukraine. And yet, we have to continue in some sense, right? Maybe even if you feel completely disempowered, maybe this is also the moment. I was asking myself, so which kind of message Małgorzata Mirgatas is actually offering us? And obviously, she's offering a very deep, non-violent message. It has always been there, but I think now it becomes even stronger, that through the lens of her experience as a Roma woman, as a feminist of minority, as somebody coming from a community that has always been never having any territorial and national tendencies, because the Roma community, the largest minority of Europe, as we know, is living both, in Ukraine, in Belarus, in Poland, in Sweden, in many countries, mostly Eastern European countries. And in some sense, yes, I think there is no other choice but to continue, even if it feels weak. It feels like a weak resistance, of what philosopher Ewa Majewska called weak resistance. But yet, I think art needs to stay this platform where you have a belief in some kind of laboratory of ideas, because otherwise, why do we go to this carnival that is Venice? It's a total carnival, from the end of 19th century, from the moment where all these national discourses have been coined, where the world art fairs have been, cooking, where the colonial empires have been at their peak. But we keep coming here, and we keep considering it important also because at the end of the day, it's also a conversation we are having together. It's a conversation between different, not only countries, because there are so many other pavilions that are not representing countries. So and of course they fight for the visibility, but still it's a conversation. And in this sense, maybe Venice makes, it's kind of a statement in light of war in Ukraine and also other conflicts going on in the world, that with many of the pavilions, many conversations going on, actually claiming for this nonviolent strategies, feminist strategies, indigenous knowledges. And we'll see what is in the air. And definitely it's not only the military mindset that Russia is now propagating.
Exactly. With Atefeh, we were discussing that probably the structure of the Biennale is close to its exhaustion. And it has always been criticized for the nationalized pavilions, Eurocentrism, tokenism, art businesses involved. And still everybody is participating, and many people, as you said, Joanna, feel it so essential as a meeting space. And also this year, when the edition was postponed because of the pandemic, so we are very curious, and this is the question to all our guests. So what does it mean to you personally to participate in this event?
I don't know, I can start if you like.
Sure.
So yeah, so to me, it feels, I must admit, it feels rather exciting to be this year here. Of course, also because of this kind of gap, a pause that was made due to COVID-19. And it's also somehow exciting to come together with the dear colleagues from different places of the world to have this moment of exchange, of dialogue, of also sharing your heartbreak, sharing information, trying to see how can we help each other, what should we do to survive this moment. And it also feels very important. I am Lithuanian and I represent Lithuania, so a small young country in Eastern Europe. So I also kind of feel it's a rather important place for us to be and have voice and make this voice heard and make us kind of visible as a country, as an entity, also in the face of such a kind of brutal Russian aggression again, so yeah, to me it feels special. And not like I don't, of course, also in terms of what we do in artistic terms, it's so exciting to work with the artists. And for Lithuania, so we don't have a pavilion in Želdynė, so each time kind of we travel from place to place. And this year, since the beginning, the artists wanted to go into kind of a real local life in Venice. So the pavilion is placed in one of the last non-gentrified squares of Venice in Castello. So kind of we are among local Venetians who actually live here, who do their business, they are like local shops, local peoples, and we are kind of in the frame of a pavilion. We are trying to work with them to find the kind of a place where our interests overlaps, and like what can we do to make all of our life and environment better. So it kind of course, there are many complexities, but I'm kind of feel happy and honored to be here, and it feels exciting to meet the colleagues, and I'm very eager to see the Biennale when it opens next week.
Hello, Julieta. We are very happy to welcome you here. So first, we discussed the idea of pessimism and optimism, and how they function in the contemporary art world. And also recently I've asked the other participants what does it mean to them personally to participate in the Biennale. So So maybe Julieta, I would like to respond to the first question, because we were also speaking about the idea of exhaustion that is touched mostly by the Ukrainian pavilion, and the idea of the reenchantment that we can observe in the works presented by Gosia Mirgatas, the artist presented by the Polish Pavilion. So we have these two confronting ideas, and we are curious, what is your position on them? Oh, you are muted.
Yeah. So first of all, sorry for being late, but the link did not show up in my email. So I was waiting and had no way to get to a Zoom room. Apologies, I tend to be on time. And I mean, it's funny that you're talking about like optimism and pessimism and the reverberations, right? And that you're channeling through like the idea of exhaustion, because obviously, we are at a very much exhausted moment in several counts, right? So like between the entirety of catastrophe that has, like the narrative of catastrophe that has been playing so relentlessly, it's very hard to not be tired, right? To not feel really exhausted, basically. And I mean, it's very funny because I was thinking today, I'm not in Venice and I'm not going to Venice for the opening. And I was thinking, wow, this is the first time in 2 decades that I'm not there. And I'm trying to understand why, because it's never been, normally I would have I would have made plans to be there. So I'm quite interested in the fact that I'm not there, that Anton is not there. And I could give you an excuse, to save face and say, well, I don't have any work, I'm not participating, so I don't have anything to do there. But that's not true, right? There is something, I don't have work there or am I participating, but that's not the reason to go or not go. And there is a kind of exhaustion right now at play as well, that also has to do with just like being simply so, I don't know if that's exhaustion. This speaks more to, it's like sitting somewhere between optimism, pessimism, and exhaustion, right? I like having this incredible overload of world, of everything that's happening, and really trying to understand if the contemporary art world is simply equipped to respond, and not knowing how well equipped we are to produce the meaningful responses. And that's something that I've been asking myself with the kind of work that I'm doing now, and the interest that I've had recently on multi-species issues and so on. I tend to wonder, okay, who is funding this? Where is the money coming from? I remember walking in Venice in front of many Russian jets, yeah, and I just think, okay, is this the moment? I'm sure they are not there because of the sanctions, but it's a very strange, it produces a very strange feeling, which is why I am not there, yeah? And it has really a lot to do with not understanding. I don't have the answer for that, but I just have the burning question of how well equipped we are to really address the questions and the issues that are playing in the world right now, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, to me, it sounds like I understand your concern. I kind of completely share same for me, but I also feel that it is important for us to kind of to have our voice, to use it, and to say what we stand for, and to stand for it, to be present, to be visible, to make our voice heard, or at least make it audible. So, because to me it feels that this is a moment that we have to do that, despite of whatever we're used to or how we feel like, but it's a moment to stand up and be here present. So yeah, Venice is not, of course, a place perhaps for evolution, but it's a great platform which is visible internationally, and I kind of think we should use it.
No, I completely agree with you. This was more about, you know, and I totally agree. And there are, I mean, I also think that it's that's everything that I said. I obviously think that. I also know that, you know, like in the main exhibition, there have never been so many women. I'm sure there have never been so many people of color representing countries before. So, you know, so that of course also makes, I mean, it's important. I mean, it's important to be there for these constituencies and so on, but I want to understand why. I mean, like, I don't know, I'm always like a bit worried about things being reduced to subject matter and to kind of like gravy trains. And so
if I may interject, like, that's really interesting, because like before you join us, actually discussing this pessimism, optimism, like we were somehow, like, what I gathered from all the opinions was that we cannot lean on anything, because art is not about commentary and like one sentence responses, and it's a process, and sometimes it can be exhausted, and sometimes it can feel more optimistic, it can bring in movement, or it can like feel the resources are like getting more limited. But at the same time, you can never say that it's just like can be compacted in a kind of response. And that's maybe what makes it interesting about the Venice, like, because somehow we all are searching for a kind of general, like, collective response to everything, to the art world, to the politics, to the environmental issues. And so I wanted to maybe ask you, like, how it can be looked upon, how can we like be at the same time this kind of community collective that respond to things, but not maybe limit it or like reduce it to a kind of commentary that art is not like is not a platform to make. Like, art response is more complicated, and like it cannot be somehow reduced to a certain kind of sentence and visibility and representation. And also from our guests that are curators, how they can like channel it into a curatorial approach. And so, and as you having like a platform that actually like is this kind of, I don't know even how to describe e-flux as this like really like different forms of engagement with the art form and artwork, how you can somehow channel all these complexities and not to reduce them, but at the same time not be not be indifferent to things that are actually happening.
Yeah, I mean, you know, the places, I mean, obviously I am I'm deeply involved with e-flux journal, but I am also an artist. So the responses are different. And when I make art, I tend not to resort to language. So it's, there are two arenas. And I mean, like I guess like one of the main questions that I have been asking myself when it comes to, I'm not going to talk so much about e-flux. I'm going to talk about art making and art objects. I think that's because that's what I'm pondering about a lot, is who am I making my work for? That's one of the questions, you know, who am I telling this to? And it's not just to myself, because then the running conversation with myself is there all the time, but who am I talking to, right? There is an audience. It's like the kind of question that a filmmaker would ask themselves. And then the two other questions that I ask myself is, how is this work being made? Meaning, what kind of resources, extractions, material relationships with the world that work symbolizes and represents. Like, for example, I think something that almost made me cry once, two works that made me cry pretty almost, was Olafur Eliasson. He took this, the tip of an iceberg to Paris. and to protest something climate change. And it was like cognitive dissonance, like how much did it, how much carbon did it take to move that thing to Paris? And then the response was, of course, I asked that question, and the response was, oh, I offset my emissions. And I'm thinking, well, I'm sorry, offset your emissions if you're a hospital and you really cannot operate without oil and fuel. But don't tell me that your hands are clean because you just paid some money so that you could move that iceberg or chunk of iceberg. And he also had this work in Venice. I don't remember if it was the last time I went or the one before, where he was making solar powered lamps using immigrant labor, unpaid, for the joy of being there. And it was also this thing, like everything that he was trying to comment on was reproduced right there. So I'm really tired of work that doesn't have coherence at that very, very basic level, that is not replicating the same things that it complains about. So the questions that I ask again is, who is the work being made for? Who is it speaking to? How is the work being made? Meaning the set of material relations that are inherent in the work. And the last, but also the question that tends to be an elephant in the room is who is paying for it? Who is funding it? And I mean, like those questions are questions, I think I also, those questions are at play in Venice all the time, so that's, I don't know if I'm being pessimist or cynical, like I can't tell you that.
But I also kind of, I completely agree. I couldn't agree more with you. But I also think kind of in the crisis like war in Ukraine and calamities like that. I think I was recently invited to Guggenheim here in Venice for the opening of the Surrealist exhibition, and I noticed that many works were made during the Second World War. And I was, the Holocaust and all the atrocities that happened. And I was thinking to myself that, of course, like on a personal level, like how did these artists manage to continue their work despite of anything? But I also was thinking that it was, I believe, very important, not only to them, but to wider audiences, to kind of people at large, because, sometimes the reality is too brutal or too dark to face it just like that. And I believe art can kind of open some space for us to imagine something, else, better, different, and also give some kind of, power, despite of we are artists. I'm a curator, so I'm not an artist, but, I'm not a politician. I am not a businessman. I cannot, change the policies of the world, but still I have some, other tools in my hands, so which is also very powerful in a different way. So kind of I think a lot about this part of of the art world nowadays.
I say the last thing just to respond to you, because I don't want to come across as saying that art should not be made, right? The production of images and, like the imagining an otherwise is incredibly important. And, producing the representations of what that otherwise can or, could be is important. And it's absolutely the work of, of artists. That is important. I think I'm not at all, disenchanted with art itself, but I am a little bit disenchanted with the trappings of art, the mechanisms around it, and how they have become in the last 15 years or so, since art has been really officially acknowledged as a financial instrument, and we even get updates about art in the front page of CNN. But yeah, I have spoken a lot already. So,
if I may, if I may jump into to refer a little bit of what about Julieta was talking, but also partly answer the question of my personal reasons of why I participate in the biennial, but also referring to what Julieta was saying, who's paying for art. I would add another question: which kind of power, or which kind of power would be a good word in many senses of this word. Which kind of power stands behind art production? And in Venice, it's also very relevant because, well, the national participation, of course, refers to that there is a nation, a state, probably a government, which stands behind the pavilion in this or that case. And so there is also some institutions which represents, which finances, which gives infrastructure, gives instruments. In case of Ukraine, it becomes like even more interesting because Ukraine has a very short and limited history of participation in Venice. I think the first Ukrainian pavilion happened in 2001. And since then, every participation is accompanied by a local scandal, like when everyone are kind of struggling and fighting each other, like the Ministry of Culture fighting artists fight each other to be represented, which is very ridiculous because obviously, and it's obvious for Ukrainian artists as well, that the Venice Biennale is not just the only opportunity in their life to be represented, but still it is, it's being kind of recognized as sort of a very important thing which many like striving for. But the biggest problem that we were facing like in Ukraine, I mean, we curators, let's say, or curators, artists, is that the Ministry of Culture, which is the governmental body, the commissioner, which is responsible for pavilions, is very bureaucratic, very slow, and very rigid. And very kind of, and I don't want to sound unpatriotic in times of war, but it does many good things. But when it comes to organizing something like which is Venice Biennale Pavilion, it's quite incapable. And our personal aim, by saying our, I mean me and my two co-curators of current Ukrainian Pavilion, our one of our kind of internal aims, internal missions were to reconsider a little bit the process of creating the pavilion, to kind of establish new type of relationship between independent curators, artists, ministry, other parties involved. And as we were joking, let's make the first pavilion without a scandal. In the end, we ended up with the first pavilion without a scandal, but with a war as a background. So in a way, we failed. It's not going to be it's not going to be the first normal pavilion. It's going to be another complicated one. What we are having now is actually also unveiling or opening a very big gap and a very big problem that Ukraine was facing, which is the failure of cultural institution policy and also the cultural diplomacy, because this is something which Russia was very successful because we all know how many efforts and energy and money, in the end oil money, was invested into cultural promotion of Russia. And this is something which Ukraine, unfortunately, and again, yes, I don't want to sound unpatriotic, but I say it as a fact, Ukrainian cultural policy was like failing for many years. And what we're facing now, with such a big attention towards Ukrainian Pavilion, this attention is unfortunately caused not only by artistic merits of Pavlo Makov work, but of course because all eyes are on Ukraine, and the Ukrainian Pavilion became like something related to it. It also gives us a very good chance to show, like our government, to show our ministry that art can be an instrument of power, of soft power. I mean, the soft power is also a problematic word. I don't want to sound kind of naive and kind of, the soft power will solve anything. But for us, I think it is a chance to show that something as funny as National Pavilion at Venice still matters, especially it matters for countries like Ukraine, which doesn't have so many, or hasn't had before, so many advocates, so many institutions to represent, so many platforms to help us raising our words. So the Venice Biennale does matter in this sense, whatever it is, with all its attractions, with all its ridiculousness, which we as a curators recognize, for example. But in our situation, it does count. Thank you. How do I?
Thank you.
Okay.
So I would like to ask Joanna first about the question, what is her personal motivation for participating in the Biennale, and also like when Lizaveta mentioned different polities behind the commissioners of the pavilions, then maybe you could discuss a bit like the National Gallery, Zachęta, that also had very difficult issues recently, and your collaboration with him.
Sure. Yes, I think, just drawing on what was said before, I think it's important to ask ourselves, how do we continue a discussion if we are exhausted? To recognize this condition of exhaustion and then think, okay, where do we go from there? And second, of course, because it gives you such an exposure, of course, how can you use this national format in a bit more counter-hegemonic model? And I guess we do see it very much this year. So for me, applying for this competition was also the way of how within a very homogenic country, which is Poland, it's the second most homogenic country after Japan, how do we even present a minority perspective? There are so few minorities, and one of them is a Roma minority, and Małgorzata Mirgatas is not only an artist, but also a Roma activist, fighting, like working with, actively with overcoming anti-Tsiganism and stigmatization of Roma people in European society. And that was, and of course, and her work is absolutely stunning and so integral and consequent on so many levels, on non-violent level, visual level, ecological level. So for me, as a, let's say, Polish national, that was really a very, very strong, being an advocate of such a voice, being a curator of such a voice, really, was the first reason to support her work, to apply. And now, after the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, and when out of the sudden so many people, so many voices speak about the need of decolonization of Eastern Europe, the need of understanding how the forces of colonial, post-colonial and decolonial theories have been navigating the relations between countries of former Soviet Union, between Central European countries, and it has been something that I've also worked on for some years. Even more, it seems to me important, and also in this panel, that many of European voices come together, and we can try to see actually how those dynamics play out, and what potential decolonization of in Eastern Europe would mean. So those many things added, I guess, make us also meet in Venice as a regional voice of sorts. And one more footnote, what I was saying, Julieta, do you remember when we were neighbors, 2017, we had a Venice opening dinner at your place? Mm-hmm. It was not we made like our own preview, so it seems like maybe you went later, but when 2017, we both were not at the preview of the Venice Biennale.
No, I did go later. Mm-hmm. I went with Leon. Yeah. But I mean, Joanna, I'm going to, this is a conversation that we have had. And I personally want to be very careful when talking about the colonial issues, because that is something that I think that discourse and that set of problems is not just talking about minorities, right? It's really something that has been the crux and the bane of certain countries in Latin America and in Africa and the Middle East, which were really colonized, that really had extractivism and a kind of abuse of resources and decimation of people and genocides and meat passages in the Atlantic and so on. So it's a chasm, it's a gigantic difference, gigantic. So I would want to develop. I was talking about that with Anton recently, because he was wondering if he was asking me about cosmism and decolonization and so on. And I was, the terminology is not there. And maybe that's a fresh space to say, okay, let's find out what are the words to describe that. Yeah. But I just would want to make the case for letting the people that have generated a particular discourse and suffered it the way they have suffered it, own their things. You know, that's not the same problem that Europe has had. You know, that's not the same problem that Asia has had. It's different. I mean, India, yes.
Sure, it has to be idiosyncratic way of looking at their own regional speciality, but for example, specificity. But for example, you know, Roma people have been slaves, like real slaves within Europe.
Yeah,
so,
but this is, I mean, like they were, I mean, how to say, it's horrible. Yeah, but I don't think that this is about, you know, it's a problem of abuse and of extraction and of many things, but it's something else. I mean, like I would just want to say that maybe it's the time to, when looking at the problems, the specific problems of Europe, Eastern Europe, and those sets of relations, to develop the terminology that comes with them, because that also would address the specificity of that set of relations.
Of course, the Westocentric, you know, vocabulary, of course, cannot be the grammar for this region. The specificity is different. Yet, it's like with feminism, you know. Of course, it's a certain set of ideas, a set of philosophy that also has to be used within local idiosyncratic specificity, and I think that's important. That's happening now.
The only thing that I worry about is distracting, you know, like taking attention from groups of people that in the same, I mean, just to use one of the things that makes me enthusiastic about the way in which Ukrainian refugees have been received in Berlin, which is great, is to think that I hope that this becomes the standard in which refugees and displaced people are treated. Which is not, it has never been the case. I do advocacy and work with refugees since 2015, and it's never the case. So just to say that there are peoples that are invisible, and I would not want to take to claim the colonial theory and make them invisible in their own terrain and take their own words away from them. But I am very.
Well, I really think we should. Yeah, we are not in the competition. We hope that those things can, you know, only support each other's like causes or struggle.
I mean, it should not be about who gets to be seen or who suffers the most. That's not the point.
Of course, no competition. It's going to be multi-directional thinking and working.
But I mean, I will obviously, same as in 2017, I will be in Venice later, and I'm very curious to see what all of you are doing. Somebody was telling me about the Polish Pavilion recently, and I'm quite curious.
I'm sitting in it right now.
Okay, that's a preview. Amazing.
Yeah, all textile palazzo, made from secondhand used clothing and throwing material into the painting.
I wanted to change somehow the subject, but like first I want to ask Neringa or Lizaveta if they have any comments on the conversation that we're going on. Okay. Actually, I wanted to somehow, maybe it is related somehow and maybe not, but I wanted to like somehow turn the conversation toward this year's theme of the Biennale, because generally it has been like few years or like, I don't know, more than few years that we have seen this resurging interest in surrealism, especially through like revisiting its non-male, non-Western heritage. And this year also, like the Biennale curated by its first woman curator, Cecilia Alemany, focuses on the feminist promise of surrealism. And it claims that it is a viable concept for thinking about transformation, about change, about our so-called post-human condition. And so I was going to ask you if you feel that this concept still has something to offer, if it enables us to think about the realities that the art force has always tried to engage with and like somehow address, being it environmental, being it technology, being it socio-political issues. I don't know how I can like, maybe Joanna, I may want to ask you, because like somehow the Polish Pavilion has this connection with magic and surrealism and enchantment, and maybe you have some comment on that.
Well, you know, when we were developing our proposal for this pavilion, it was before Cecilia announced her topic in some sense. And when she did announce it, and then we also saw that one of the chapters of her exhibition is called Reenchanting the World, so also uses Silvia Federici book in a way. You know, we didn't feel like, oh my God, it's like overlapping, quite and the opposite. I think it's a common conversation that we are having, and I guess many other pavilions, like the Sami Pavilion this year, for example, also referring to that. So it's interesting to see, you know, how art sometimes you know, anticipates or catches certain things that we are that are in the air. And I'm looking forward to, of course, I haven't seen her exhibition yet, so I'm looking forward to see how those things can, you know, just speak to each other.
You know, one thing that is interesting about the current moment in art, and it's not only about surrealism, yeah, but it's more like the sense that in the last decade or so, less than a decade, the canon of art has been opening up, right, and allowing for other voices to come in. So you don't have anymore this straight line that goes from the cave paintings to Jeff Koons or something along those lines, yeah, like filled with that white men in a very direct lineage, but other subjectivities start to come in and start to be allowed in that space of representation, and in that is the space in which cultural value is created, right? So I remember that in the Berlin Biennial that Gabi curated in 2015, I want to say.
18, I think.
18. Okay,
18.
dates, I'm bad with that. I was seeing it with a friend, and my friend at some point was incredibly uncomfortable, and we discussed it in detail, yeah. And his point was that he could not relate to the works because it was representing others, right? It was like it was not about white men. There were no images that he could anchor himself in, or realities depicted that he could anchor himself in. And I kept thinking, well, like, welcome to the world welcome to the world of women, welcome to the world of Black people, welcome to the world of us that have been trying to operate, fooling ourselves and always pretending that, yeah, yes, I can see the world as a white man, so that you can just move. And so the possibility of all those voices and perspectives entering what was a very close canon until very recently, it makes you know, like art, in a sense, I'm very hopeful about what happens in terms of like the images and realities and so on, as all these voices and
yeah,
you know,
and languages and
yeah,
and actually, you know, I was in preparation to this, I was reading this some Lucy Lippert essays where she says all this in the 70s, but of course there was no room for her voice, you know. So it's not that people are not saying that they were saying, but yet this other white men, they were too present, they were too, you know, there was too much space for them. And now when you look at her essays on craft and how vernacular art and high art actually should be combined and come together, and kind of how creative impulse should be celebrated rather than a diploma from the school, this in a way I'm expecting to see more of the voices interweaving in this biennial about that.
Sorry, do you have any comment on the main show of the Biennale, Lizaveta or Neringa?
Well, I'm quite curious to see it, of course, and also like also because I'm quite interested in this this particular section. I mean, I'm also quite interested in how this like different generations of artists, of like female artists would be combined, because there is this kind of a like fragments or chapters where Cecilia shows this kind of historical artworks, but then, I mean, saying historical artworks, I mean artworks dated back from 20th century, but also some contemporary artwork. So how this kind of feminist discourse would be also combined with this transgenerational discourse, and how we would see the artworks created like in early 20th century, when there was no feminist discourse as we know it now. There was something else. There was, of course, some other kind of emancipation movement, but it was quite different to see. Well, so I'm also quite interested in this kind of historical perspective of how the curator Cecilia would kind of unfold this art historical narrative, so to say, if you know what I mean, if you understand what I'm talking about. Just a couple of words about Lucy's Lippert writing. This is something I also quite often refer to and like to read, and what Joanna was saying, that yeah, the texts which were written when it was all about like white men artists kind of domination, if to say so, but at the same time, you know, reading this text now, you realize how relevant they are now, and how powerful they were at the moment when she wrote them, you know, and this kind of power is still interesting. This voice is still not outdated at all, and it kind of becomes even only more important and more well, timely, so to say.
Just a little sad that we have to repeat the same messages for so many years until they are heard now.
True.
But it is worth trying.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Would you like to add something, Neringa?
No, I was just kind of also trying to refer to the question, but also the curated show by Julieta Aranda. As a female curator, I'm kind of also very happy to see that there are so many female artists present this year, even though Lithuania is presenting white male artists. But coming from such a small country with such a difficult and complex history for us, these questions also mean something a little different than in the West, let's say.
We also are very curious, and maybe give you a little bit more space to talk about the works. We already said a lot, but maybe you would like to add something about the works that would be presented in Polish, Lithuanian and Ukrainian pavilion. Maybe you find something relevant to add. This is mostly the question to Neringa, Lizaveta, and Joanna.
I just realized that I didn't even mention the name of the artist, who is Robertas Narkos. Tonight. So Robertas Narkos is presenting a total installation, and this year we are, as mentioned, we are in Castella, in a kind of very local area of Castella. Lithuanian Pavilion is located in two premises. We have two little venues. One is a former bakery, the other is the former laundry place, so really in the city. And so the artist is creating this surrealist cooperative that is producing a secret product made from an invasive seaweed species harvested here in Venice. And there are kind of many collaborators and involved, starting from a professional fermentation specialist, scientists, fellow artists, and local residents. And the artist kind of so creates this complex organism. And the kind of the leading layer is that he trusts the gut feeling. So the gut feeling, our intuition that hopefully will lead us to make the best decisions, trying to create some, I don't know, better futures. Welcome. We are opening on the 21st of April, so please come by if you are in Venice.
Thank you. We are so looking forward to see all the pavilions. And maybe Lizaveta and Joanna, would you like to add something about the artists that will be presented in Venice?
Well, I spoke a little bit already about Małgorzatas work, but basically what you see behind me is it's a version of a famous palazzo in Ferrara in Italy, Palazzo Schifanoia, which was a very important reference point for Aby Warburg and his concept of migration of meanings and images. And he was tracing, it's a zodiac, it's a walking zodiac. So actually you have different months, like you can see here, this is March, and Aries, this is what is it, April, this is Twins, Gemini, and it's a zodiac in Palazzo, pretty important for art history. And in this whole migration of images and the concept of iconology that Warburg coined, of course, there is, even if the images travel from India through Persia to ancient Greece and Renaissance in Italy, somehow the Roma culture and the nomadic Roma culture doesn't appear. So in a way, what Małgorzata does is like her own way of creating this picture palace, also as another writer, Ali Smith, calls it picture palace, but by throwing material into the painting and creating an own textile version of this palazzo, and also looking at this questioning, of course, also Warburg's idea and not many others about migrations of meanings, and yet like making many operations from culture appropriation to culture appreciation, one can say. So very much invite you. And also I will have to go in 2-3 minutes because we are going to test the light and it's going to be very, very, very dark. So I will have to leave you very soon.
Thank you, Anna. And Lizaveta, I will direct the same question for you.
Like I also I think told a lot, but like in general, Pavlo Makov is the artist who's been based in Kharkiv, which is a big city in the east of Ukraine for more than 30 years. He's one of the most like prominent and well-known and established in a way artists, but at the same time he's not the kind of artist who is kind of well, just made a stop in his career by having a success and recognition, but he's someone who is really very open and very interested in a dialogue with younger artists, with younger curators, because we represent different generations. He's much older than we are, but I can say proudly that he's a good friend of mine, and we are just on the same page in just private conversation and in our like vision of art and of exhibition making. So his project is called Fountain of Exhaustion, and the idea of the project came in 1994, like in the very beginning of like right after the Soviet Union collapsed, in the first years of Ukrainian independence. In this idea of this fountain, originally he wanted to install it as a fountain, as a kind of a working kinetic sculpture or just public space object. He wanted to install it in Kharkiv, but he never succeeded. And after that, this project had different prototypes, different variations without water, just as a model, as a sketch, as a prototype, like in museums and in art centers. But the idea was always to have it as a functioning fountain. And actually, like 2 years ago, we invited him to apply with this idea of the fountain for Venice, and also to add. So this in the pavilion, this project has a double name, Fountain of Exhaustion Aqua Alta, which of course also refers to Venice, the like biggest museum in the world, which slowly goes under the water, and also representing many things, like starting from global ecological crisis, global warming, which causes Venice to, to go under the water, ending up with the entertainment industry, which Venice represents, and which also makes it go under the water in a symbolic sense. So this project was envisioned referring to a very local context of Kharkiv, a post-Soviet big Ukrainian city, but now this fountain of exhaustion became symbol of exhaustion at many, many levels, and it refers to global community, as I mentioned before. So you're very welcome to join us. Also, we have an opening on 22nd of April, so if you want, just come to greet the artists and just pass by any day after 19th.
Thank you so much. We have a few more minutes. If you will have any things that you would like to add to our discussion, to summarize a little bit, so just feel free to express it.
I have although a little bit of more than a few more minutes, so like maybe 10-15 minutes. So, but like any not final, but like semi-final thoughts that you thought you wanted to discuss and haven't been there, we would be happy to hear your thoughts.
If not, then I have one particular question to Joanna, because you are Polish Pavilion is participating in the first solidarity network that between Polish Pavilion, New Zealand Pavilion, Albanian, British, and Nepali and Singapore pavilions. And the project, like the first solidarity network, is kind of emphasizing being first to represent certain groups. And I'm curious how to lead this narration of being the first as a kind of achievement that is not tending toward tokenism and doesn't overcast the artist's personalities and artistic qualities or labels them in anywhere. So maybe, Joanna, you could elaborate a little bit on that.
Where first Solidarity Network it was an invitation to us to which we responded. So it was an invitation from an artist, actually an artist-led initiative of first Pacific trans artist from Samoa Island, Yokiki Hara, who represents New Zealand. And they reached out to a couple of pavilions that do something for the first time. And of course, you don't know exactly if you identify yourself that way. And for example, we have discussed this with Małgorzata, who is the first Roma artist ever to represent any pavilion, any national pavilion. Of course, in her work, it's not that she would have to work with her Roma identity, it's her choice. Once somebody in Poland has asked her, you don't need to always describe yourself as a Roma artist, you are Polish and you can just obliterate that fact. And she said, no, actually, why should I if I choose to? But it doesn't mean that everyone would have to, who is Roma by birth, would have to work with that. So that's absolutely a choice of that person to decide if you, and this is how I also understand this first solidarity network, that you actually consciously work from within this community or within this identity. And we are also using in our work this term of a scholar, Ether Brooks, who calls also what Małgorzata is doing, another woman feminist of minority. It's kind of a feminist that works from within often patriarchal structures, that doesn't leave those structures behind to go, for example, to big cities. So Małgorzata also consciously chose to go back to her village in Tatra Mountains, and from within this village practices what we all use this, many of us use this situated knowledges, but this is actually what it is in applied sense, like she uses it as a Roma situated knowledge. So I guess, there, and again, I was saying this at the beginning, there are some conversations in there are some conversations going on, and I see this first solidarity network also as a way of putting certain forces together within a conversation.
Thank you so much. Are there any like final comments? Or I would like really much to thank you for participating in this meeting. It was wonderful to see you here, and I would like also to invite you and or our listeners to our following project that will take place in Venice, Hyper Annotations 2.0, organized by the New Center for Research and Practice Parallel Academia Group, where we will talk with artists and curators taking part in the Biennale about their perspectives on this year's event. This Hyper Annotations will take place from 20th and until 22nd of April between 11 and 2 p.m. and will be hosted by Lithuanian Pavilion. And all the interviews will be broadcasted on our New Center's social media channels. And also we would like, with Atefeh, thanks very much to Kasra Rahmanian and Mo Salemi for organizing this event for us, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you
so
Great
much.
seeing everyone. Thank you
Much, everyone.
Best of luck and see you in Venice.
See you.
Bye.
Or somewhere else.
I'll go check your work later on. I really look forward.
You're more than welcome, Julieta. Yeah.
I'll be there. I have a show. No, the reality why I'm not in Venice is that I have a show opening on May 25th.